Councillor Hills, followed by Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. I'm not 100% sure of where I'm going to vote on this right now, but I do have some concerns or some comments regarding this. One, will everyone who votes for this actually turn up? Because as a previous local board member, 21...
That was what I was going to say.
21 local boards, that was all that we had to present, and often we would come to this room and only a third of the councillors were here. So, yeah, so as a even just covering 21 local boards, I often felt that was a bit disappointing. Secondly, we've done a lot of work on this for, I assume, a long time in hearings and not increased participation. We've not increased voter turnout. We've not increased the diversity. As my experience as a local board member, holding meetings where we expect the same already very engaged people who write letters to the editor and all that sort of thing come to hearings, come to meetings, to sit and hear the same things, and you have to be very well versed and very confident to stand up here and have a chat. So I'm not opposed to it, and if this happens, I'll turn up to as every meeting as I possibly can, but I just worry that we end up putting too much focus on the people who come present to us, and we don't put enough focus on the people who write to us or the people who live very far away who submit to us through social media and other means, and then we end up the media and the councillors hear a few voices who are already very connected and already very engaged and are the same people who submit all the time. So I see merit in this, and voting against it will make you sound very undemocratic, I guess. But I think there's a way to allow more voices in a more modern way through people's busy lives and the diverse communities right across Auckland. So yeah, I do have some concerns, and about the cost and time and staff time and everything that, you know, if we have 1.5 million people turning up, we're going to be here for a while. So.
Thank you, Councillor. I now call on Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're calling for people to speak in favour of the motion?
For or against.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to speak in favour of the motion. I think it's just a additional... Mr. Mayor, you made a very good summary how we've matured as an organisation, and we're using more and more tools to gain public input and public consultation, which is terrific. And what I've heard from the conversation today and the debate around the table is that this has been used in the past, and it seems to have given opportunities to individuals who might not have participated or wanted to speak with us directly. So, you know, I just feel that it's another avenue for public consultation, and the main reason why I'd be voting in favour for it, Mr. Mayor, is it just gives another opportunity for the public to participate in consultation with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now call on Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So for the last term, I remember the first year of the annual plan, I went to 17 Have Your Says. In Desley's Iraqi ward, there was about 250 people. I remember at one meeting and around 220 at the next. Went to one in the Fowl, and we had 6. Fowl? Let's play off of the Fowl. We had 6. That's the important part. Yeah. I've been to ones where there's been 17. I've been to ones where there's been 1. But I went to 17 Have Your Says. LTP, I went to 14. The results were the same. The digital response mechanisms that we run, the 2 different forums, are increasing rapidly, and particularly to those who are on the periphery of the city, but also for the youth, whose voice is often not heard in the old context. So that's important. When we had the local boards in, as Councillor Hill said, the attendance from councillors was woeful, especially the latter parts of the day. I will remember being a very young farming lad in Clevedon, going to Manukau to present in a formal context. It was intimidating. It was intimidating. So if we do include these formal hearings, are we going to have them just here? And if we do, how convenient is that for people to get to it? Or are we going to spread them all over the country? The formal hearing processes that we do have, yes, do include EMA, do include the Chamber of Commerce, but they also include social groups, grey powers represented. I recall Salvation Army coming. I remember the City Mission coming, and others. People who represent groups or clusters of others have the ability to belong to that forum type representation. Always near the end of a have a say event, I always ask the people sitting around the tables, what do you think of this format? I've yet to see a negative response. People say it's great, we actually are learning a lot. We're hearing about different options from our fellows around the table. You know, the response was positive. The formal situation was, yes, used in the past, and I would suggest that's probably where it belongs. The new ways of systems, the have your says, the less formal, the less socially structured, but the more numerous and the empowering of the communities, to my way of thinking, is a far better way of doing it. And the response growth, as I said earlier, from our digital formats and platforms is increasing rapidly, and that also needs emphasis. So, Mr. Mayor, I will not be supporting the amendment because I believe it belongs actually in the past.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Clow.
Yes, well, I'm going to call councillors' bluff by voting for this, and we'll be interested to see how many do turn up when we do have these submissions. But I'd like some guidance from the mover and the seconder. What happens when we get a tremendous number of pro forma submissions, written submissions, and then you get a whole lot of those people then want to come effectively to present on a pro forma basis as well. So you could end up, every hotel in Auckland sends their general manager, plus every motel, plus every backpacking unit, and I dare say that living wage would also be one that might consider having 100 people turn up to make 100 submissions, on top of living wage Aotearoa submitting. So just some feedback from the mover and seconder about the pro forma, more types of submissions, and the people who put their names. Do we deal with them individually the same? Because, you know, that's 5 minutes times 100 is 500 minutes.
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. Thank you very much. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. By no means do I think we should block, create obstacles for people to submit. But I've attended a lot of have your says, etc., and if we looked at our feedback report from the last annual plan, we had the amount of people that actually turned up to submissions either in this hall or anywhere around our region was minuscule compared to the online and other forms of engagement. I do think that it's very easy for us to turn up to these, listen to the people that turn up, but then not look at all the other submissions, and we think we've done our job. And I think it's really important that, even though it's a big job, but that's what we signed up for, to read those, we need to be listening to our young people, listening to the people that often they either can't afford to get somewhere, they can't take the time off, or they've got an issue with transport. If we focus too much on the people turning up thing, it takes our focus off on the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that submit online. So, I'm not against this in principle, but I do think that it just makes things difficult. And when we talk about the fact that we are council, that means if you go to a local board have your say event, that is council you're submitting to, that you're speaking to, that you're giving your feedback to. So I'm sort of a bit confused about why we're making a differentiation and saying it's better to submit in this town hall than it is in a local board area. Because it's actually easier for people to go to their local board or their local area, and we shouldn't differentiate that it was a different quality of feedback. No, it's just as good. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is what extra cost. No one's talked about the extra cost that this might accrue to this when we have perfectly good channels of personal submitting forums anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think and I apologise for being late, I was at another meeting, but you were speaking when I came in and you talked about the diversity of ways that we're trying to connect in with our community. And given Jacques Victor's really good presentation yesterday, which showed us what life was like 30 years ago, you know, we kind of need to move on a little bit. And I think that I agree with the Deputy Mayor. You know, the number of times we sit in this room and people are reading their submission and their hands are shaking and they can barely read the paper because it is daunting. I don't think we do our best democracy when we put people through that. I also don't think that simply sitting here for 9 hours, 5 days in a row, with the greatest of respect to everyone around this table, people on computers doing emails and Facebook, whilst ticking off the fact that our poor submitter who's put hours into their submission sits there and does it. I don't think that's doing the best for democracy. So I think we do need to be forward-looking. And you know, the intent of this, I think, is reasonable. But Councillor Cooper has said it all. You know, really, I think we've moved on from the hierarchy of come to the council or go to the local board. And I think, for goodness sake, the local board is charged with doing a lot of good, or making a lot of good decisions locally. Let's have the local board hear from their local community. Let's have the local communities find their own way to tell us what they want. And if there are some critical issues of, you know, large expenditure and large regional connect, then if need be, we can have some sort of formalised process for those. But, you know, a lot of us have been around this table a long time, and I think that form of colonial, paternalistic democracy is past. I'll get myself into trouble for that, but, you know, I think we need to move on. So I could go either way on this one, but I'm going to support the Deputy Mayor on this, and I'm not going to be voting for it. And if it goes through, I'll be here doing my duty, but I'll be certainly counting to see if there's 20 of us around this table, because 9 times out of 10, there's not.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we all agree that we wish everybody to have the opportunity to participate in the process. I think the conjecture potentially is the second part of the proposed amendment, and that is before the Finance and Performance Committee, or in other words, in front of everybody around this table, all right? And if you remember, I sort of put out a bit of a compromise, and that is that locally, at a have your say, you could have more than one councillor. In other words, you could get a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 councillors at a localised event, and effectively do potentially the same. So I'm always trying to find a compromise. Rather than a divide. And I wondered whether the mover and the seconder would potentially leave this amendment and just see what Auckland wants to do. Because potentially if we got a situation where people did want to say more than because I think that this got clouded a little bit between the stakeholders and individuals and other stakeholders. So potentially if we waited to see who wanted to speak to more than just their 1 or 2 councillors, that potentially we had the flexibility to work towards somewhere that somehow to do that, and whether it be, you know, a geographical group of councillors or a mix, we could look at that depending on the group. But for me, the key point is to allow every submitter, whether they represent a group or individual, to have their say. I think that's the key to it. And it's almost, in my opinion, undemocratic not to vote for this. On the other hand, it's got to be for everybody, and it's almost potentially you might get people who say, oh well, I don't know that I will bother going to just the local have your say, because if I go to the whole group, I'll be listened to more. And it shouldn't be more or less. It should be the same. Just a long-winded way of saying, maybe asking the mover and the seconder if they would be prepared to amend, or they want to keep it as it is, based on that information.
Okay. I've got 2 other speakers. I'll ask the mover at some point to comment whether he wishes to amend that to try to find a consensus resolution of it. So maybe, Councillor Newman, you can think of that. In the meantime,